the studio. Today we have a special guest monitoring my progress. This is Mimi. She's going to be here with us for our Love is Love panel. Welcome back to the studio today. Today, as I said, we have a special guest with us. It's Mimi. She's going to be keeping me company because normally I am here by myself. Cameraman, sound, lighting, humor, such as it is. But today we're going to be working on a fun project. This is just on a solid piece of fabric, so there's no piecing on this. It's called our Love is Love panel. And we're going to be taking this kit, which has all of the laser cut and pre-fused applique in it, and we're going to go ahead and make a beautiful wall hanging out of it. So we're going to take this and turn it into this. This is a really cute wall hanging. It would be great for a married couple or just to support any of your friends and family. It's a really bright and cheerful project, and we're going to get started right now. I always love to get started on a new project, and this is a particularly happy project, Love is Love by Patricia Ritter, and I just think it's really beautiful, all the different rainbow of colors and the birds. And so we're going to get started on that today. This is the cover photo on the photo, and the package also always includes the instructions on the process of how to put everything together. I'm going to be using some Scotch Magic tape here in just a second, and this is what the paper pattern would look like. This would look this way either from ordering it in the kit, or if you selected this online as a self-print pattern, this would print on regular office paper, regular computer paper at your house, and it has little dotted lines that show you where to go ahead and cut the paper so it all matches together. What, Mimi? No, I did turn the music off. They can hear me. I'm going to go ahead and move the camera in, and that way you can see how I go ahead and cut the papers, trim the edges, and get them taped together. And as you can see, Mimi's watching me over my shoulder, making sure I do everything correct. So I'm going to move the camera, and we'll get moving on piecing our pattern together. As you can see on the first page of the instructions and the pattern, it has the layout for how to put the pieces together, and then once you put these together in twos, then you're going to put them together in this fashion to create one large segment that we will use as our underlayment for our fabric to get our placement correct on all the components. Also, you can see on the edge of the paper there's a dotted line on some of the edges, and that's where you will trim to line up one piece to the next. And sometimes I also will look at an edge to see where the design stops on the printing, and I'll go ahead and trim that off also, so when I'm placing it to the next piece I don't have a white strip there that might block the progress of my work. So I'm going to go ahead and just start trimming off some of these little scrap edges just so my paper pattern lines up good. And I have a paper rotary cutting blade in my rotary cutter so that I'm not dulling the blade for a fabric later. I just keep an extra rotary cutter, and I just use it for paper like this. And again, you see here I'm just cutting right where the edge of the design stops, because I know that indicates that there's going to be a little overlap there. And this really just takes a few minutes. I'm going to go ahead and finish these up. You won't have to watch all of that. And I'll get back to you when I have the paper pattern all taped together. You can see I trimmed a little bit too much off of a couple slices, But I have this taped roughly together where everything's going to go, so I can go ahead and remove my rotary cutting mat, and I'm going to put up my light box and pull out my kit and start pulling out some of the components so I can get them laid out. As you can see, we have a beautiful collection of little birds that are stacked on top of each other, and then the whole border says "Love is Love" all the way around it. The pattern also has little targets, double circles. The purpose of these is just to line up the pattern. There are not going to be any applique components for those. Those are just for placement of the pattern. And each pattern page also had a page number, but it also had a section number which corresponded to your diagram map up on the side, just showing you how the pieces or the components go together. So I'm going to go ahead and switch out my rotary cutting mat for my light box, and we'll move on to the next phase. As you can see, I've chosen a really beautiful... What? No, Mimi, I don't think that's blocking your dress. Alright, I'll go ahead and move it. There, everyone can see you. I've chosen a really beautiful ombre batik. I believe this is by Hoffman. I would say this is kind of in I don't know, it's like a bluish seafoam color. It's a little bit longer than what I need, so what I was going to do is position this over top of the paper pattern and see where the components of the pattern line up, and then choose what section of the fabric I'm going to use. The width is correct, I cut that, but this was the width of fabric here, and I wanted to put the pattern under it before I chose just which section of the ombre that I'm going to keep. So I'm going to get the paper pattern over and lay that out, and then we'll move on to laying out our pieces. What I've done is lay my background fabric on top of the pattern, and I decided I wanted to keep the darkest part of the ombre at the bottom as part of the wall hanging. And because the lettering is white, I'm shying away from the top, which is a little bit lighter. It almost goes to white, and that really could be a cool effect also, with the lettering almost fading into the background, into eternity. Love is love, which is as it should be. But I think I'm going to go with the little bit darker component of the ombre at the bottom, and I want to give a little extra space to the bottom so I don't have to lose any of it in the binding. And I can go ahead and start laying out my pieces and getting some of these shapes in place and some of the lettering. One thing I also will say, reason why I chose to use something different than the sample that we have on this quilt, is that I wanted to let you know that you can always personalize these things with your fabric choices. I'm changing it up here with the background fabric, but you could go even much further than that and just download the SVG file and select your own fabric and fuse it all and cut it with a Cameo silhouette or a Brother Scannon to cut. Or you could use this pattern as a hand applique pattern, or cut it out by hand with the fusible web also. So you can personalize these items, and this is just one way I'm personalizing this one with this ombre background. So I'm going to lay out my component pieces as they would be, and that'll make it easier for us to assemble this project. The color cover photo always really comes in handy for me, because there are a lot of very similar shapes and sizes, and the color photo always helps with placement. And I always like to lay out the pieces in a pretty close proximity to where they're actually going to go. And I've done that here. I have all the letters just stacked up on top of themselves, so all the E's are together, all the O's, the L's, and so on. But I'm going to start with the body of the quilt with the lowest bird on the chain here. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. And you can see here in my climate anyway, this fusible web paper backing just peels right off. And I can go ahead and get that into place. One thing that I will tell you in regard to the shapes, the beaks are all the same size. And we do that to help with cutting down the cost of manufacturing all these different shapes. So what you would do with these is, in the beginning here, you'll see that this is almost completely exposed, the beak. But as we progress up the quilt, we will hide more and more of the beak around behind the back of the head, and that will make the beak appear as if it's the correct size for that body, even though the beaks are all the same size. This fusible backing peels off really easily. If you ever have a problem with that, you can always score one of the shapes with a pin or something, a seam ripper, and by doing that you give yourself something to grab onto. It's also really good so you're not fussing around with the very edge, and so that you don't cause any fraying. But I generally don't have a problem here in my climate. The paper generally peels off. The only ones I ever have a little bit of trouble with are these black ultra suede pieces, which are a little bit thicker and they're just a little bit more finicky. You can use the heat of your hand to help. It doesn't really fuse the piece in place, but it does help keep it stuck while you're working. As you can see with the next bird up, we're going to have a little bit more of the beak hidden behind the body. And I'm going to be using 2 placement points for this. Did I do it wrong already? Green. There we go. I want both to match the pattern, but I also want the bird to actually be touching the bird just below it. And as you can see on this particular one, this bird will go just slightly underneath the wing of this one, so I'm going to be working in a crazy order here. It's kind of a weird, gloomy day here, and it's making a funny light in the studio, even though I have all my studio lights on. It still has a funny glow about the day. Now I can go back and put the lower wing on. Sometimes what I will do is layer some of the component pieces off of the background before I put them on. For example, I would put the wing on the body of the bird just as it's laying on the pattern, so I don't have to see also through the background. And then when I get ready to put the body on, the wing is already in place. And sometimes that is helpful in positioning when you have multiple layers of components that are all in one area. Even with the light box, it can be hard to see. Again, this one's going to go, the body goes underneath the wing of this one, so I'm going to go ahead and stack those again the same way. I'll do the beak first because it gets tucked back. And this wing I can put on because it's in a different area than the little bird above it. All of these components come in the kit when you buy it. The fabric is all pre-selected for you. It's all laser cut and pre-fused with the Steam-A-Seam 2. So all you have to do is peel the paper backing off and it will get fused using the heat of an iron or with a blow dryer, whichever you prefer. You do have to have a steam component to it, so I don't like to put steam in my iron, that way it won't leak on me. But what I do is I mist it with a little spray bottle, and the mist will give me my steam component for the Steam-A-Seam 2, which is required. Uh-oh, I forgot to put his beak on. But you can see the Steam-A-Seam 2 allows us to reposition our components if necessary. They will stay in place if I needed to move this, but they're not permanent until I fuse it. And that comes in handy a lot of the time. For that reason, I would never fuse these components as I go, because I like the ability to reposition as needed. It looks like while I was talking I forgot to give this bird his eye, and we do want him to see where he's going. I don't want him to fly into a telephone pole on his way to visit his friends. And I'll go ahead and finish this one. Mimi just reminded me I'm blocking her view. It's a lot of work to have a diva in the studio, let me tell you. That was a compliment. Sometimes my big fingers are just too big for these little pieces. I suppose I could use tweezers, but I don't think that would be any different. The little rounded part of the bird's foot is always his feet. The squared off part always gets tucked underneath the body. I don't know if this trick will work on something so small. Can't tell if that helped or not. But in the end, I got it. Fortunately, that's a very little piece. If I made a mistake, I hope it won't show. So what we have left, I have the top bird. He's watching out over everybody, even though he's little. And I started to put him down without the beak. This is the perfect example, though. You'll see just how much of the beak is hidden behind the head here, so that we have everything still in proportion. And once this is layered with batting and quilted, you won't be able to see any of that. I know a lot of people have been raised to always top stitch around the edges of their fusible applique, but we do not do that. What we do is we just use a quilting pattern that complements the design, and we use clear monofilament, and that way you don't need to change the thread as it passes over anything. Now I also think you could do cream colored and it would be fine. I haven't decided what I will quilt this with yet. This particular flower, I always have to go around and round to try and figure out which way it goes. It always gets me. It always looks so different than what I think it is going to. And we're just about finished with the main component of this, all of the beautiful birds and the flower. The next step will be positioning the lettering around the outside edge. And some people don't like lettering on their quilts, so you could easily omit that. But this is the main theme of this particular project, so I'm certainly not going to omit it here. But at the same time, I'm not going to torture you by making you watch me put all of those letters in place. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the camera, and I'll go ahead and get the Love is Love around the outside perimeter of this, and then we'll switch out the light box for the ironing board, and we'll get this fused down. Well, I patiently got all of my letters on the background. Didn't really take that long, but it was a little monotonous, so I didn't want to torture you by making you watch it. And it's kind of amazing because my quilt matches Mimi's dress, which is kind of a pleasant surprise. Because I don't have any moisture, any water in my iron, I'm going to go ahead with the spray bottle. It just has water in it. And I'm going to mist the top of all of these different applique components. The second reason I'm going to mist it like this is because I'm going to be using a Teflon pressing sheet, which wouldn't allow the heat or the moisture of the steam iron to pass through it. So that's another reason why. And I'm going to go ahead. It isn't quite large enough for me to get the whole thing at once, but I can get the majority of it. Well, actually, if I really don't move it, I could get it all. And I have to keep in mind that the heat of the iron is going to have to penetrate the Teflon pressing sheet and through multiple layers of the fusible web. So I want to leave that in place long enough for that to happen. After I get this fused from the top, what I will do also is flip the quilt panel over, and I will fuse the whole thing from the back again, starting with my spray bottle and misting it to make sure that there is moisture to activate that Steam-A-Seam 2. You really can't overfuse the Steam-A-Seam 2. You would burn the fabric before you dissipated all of the fusible. So overfusing is not the issue, it's generally underfusing. If you find that you're quilting something that you have fused, whether it's a product of ours or of your own, and you're getting gumming on the needle, either from top stitching or quilting, that's probably a good indicator that you have not fused long enough. And I am just kind of going around the section here. I'm going to go back after the video is over because this is also not the most exciting thing to watch. but I will fuse, make sure I get probably 8 or 10, sometimes 12 or 15 seconds on some of those compound pieces to make sure they're fused properly. The black eyes are always the thickest. Those are usually ultra suede, and those really take quite a bit of heat to penetrate the ultra suede down to the fusible. So I always like to really get those. Another reason why I like to use this Teflon pressing sheet is because sometimes I get lazy and I'll push the iron side to side, and I have done this. Without the pressing sheet, I will catch the edge of one of my fusible, scrunch it up, the iron goes on top of it, so I fuse it, and what I'm doing is fusing it scrunched up, which is not the look I'm going for. So I'm going to go ahead and take the Teflon pressing sheet off and flip this over, and I'll press the whole thing again, and then we'll have the finished top for this particular project. Thanks for joining Mimi and I in the studio today. We have the Love is Love project wrapped up for the top, and I'm really happy with the way that the ombre fabric came out in the background of this. I believe that was a Hoffman batik ombre. I have these in many colors, so you probably will see this pop up again in a different video. But we want to thank you for stopping in. Remember to gracefully reserve your judgment of others, but love freely, because love is love. Thank you for joining us in the studio today, and we'll see you next time.